The silk felt like a lie against my skin. It was the color of a midnight sky, clinging to my hips, pooling at my feet on the cold marble floor. A lie because nothing in my life was this smooth, this effortless. Every breath I took in this penthouse apartment, 60 floors above the glittering sprawl of Tokyo, was a deliberate calculation. The diamond necklace felt heavy, a beautiful, cold weight against my throat. A collar, I thought, and dismissed the idea as quickly as it came. Collars were for things that were owned. This was a contract, a business arrangement. I met my own eyes in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. The woman looking back was a stranger. Her hair was swept up in an elegant coil, her skin glowing under the recessed lighting. Her eyes, though, were the same, wary, haunted. The ghost of a 26-year-old art historian from Chicago looked out from behind a fortress of couture and jewels. A presence shifted in the room behind me, the air thickening almost imperceptibly. I didn't need to turn. I had learned the sound of his silence. Kenji Tanaka moved like the world rearranged itself to get out of his way. He stopped a few feet behind me, his reflection joining mine. He was in a bespoke Tom Ford suit, the charcoal wool so dark it was almost black. Notie. The top 2 buttons of his stark white shirt were undone, revealing the edge of a tattoo, the intricate scales of a dragon coiling over his collarbone. His power wasn't in noise or gestures, it was in his absolute stillness. He watched my reflection, his eyes dark, unreadable. "Are you ready?" His voice was low, a gravelly hum that seemed to vibrate through the floor. It was a voice that never needed to be raised. I smoothed a hand down the silk of my dress. "As I'll ever be." He stepped forward. The scent of him, sandalwood and something like cold smoke, enveloped me. He didn't touch me. He didn't have to. His proximity was a physical force. His fingers adjusted the diamond necklace, his knuckles brushing the sensitive skin of my neck. I fought the shiver that threatened to betray me. It wasn't fear. It was something else, something far more dangerous. "This piece was made for an empress," he said, his gaze fixed on the necklace in the mirror. "It suits you." An empress. A pretty word for a queen in a gilded cage. 3 months ago, I had been Imani Williams, a woman whose biggest worry was securing funding for a new exhibit. A woman married to Marcus, the man I had loved since we were 20. The man who had taken my heart, my trust, and our shared future, and incinerated it all for a woman named Jessica with blonde hair and an empty smile. The memory was a sharp, physical pain. Marcus standing in our living room, the one I'd painted myself, telling me he was in love. Not just that he'd made a mistake, but that he was in love. He used the word like a weapon, gutting me with it. He said Jessica understood his ambition, his drive. What he meant was that Jessica's father owned a development company that could make him rich. I, with my modest salary and passion for forgotten artists, had become an anchor. He'd left me with a mountain of debt he'd quietly accrued in both our names and a divorce decree that felt like an eviction notice from my own life. I was drowning. Then, through a connection I never knew I had, a quiet client from the museum who had always been kind to me, came an offer. The offer had a name, Kenji Tanaka, head of the Tanaka-gumi, a Yakuza clan whose empire was built on shadows and blood, but whose public face was in real estate, tech, and high finance. He needed a wife who was an outsider, with no ties to his world, no family that could be used as leverage against him. An American. A woman who looked graceful on his arm at galas like the one we were about to attend. He needed a respectable front, and I needed to survive. The contract was simple. For 2 years, I would be his wife in every public sense. In return, my debts would vanish, and I would be given a life of security beyond my wildest dreams. After 2 years, an amicable, quiet divorce. I would be free and wealthy enough to disappear and start again, anywhere in the world. I had signed the papers without a second thought. Survival is a primal instinct. It strips you of pride, of hesitation. It was only later, living in the silent, opulent beauty of his penthouse, that I began to understand the true cost. He stepped back, his assessment of me in the mirror complete. Let's go. It is poor form for the host to be late. The charity gala was being held in the grand ballroom of a hotel his organization owned. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Men in tailored suits and women in glittering gowns moved through the space, their laughter brittle. Every single person in this room was either powerful, owed Kenji a debt, or feared him. Or all three. His hand rested on the small of my back, a gesture of proprietary ownership for the world to see. It was light, barely there, but I felt the heat of it through the silk. It was a brand. We moved through the crowd, a path clearing for us as if by magic. Kenji nodded curtly, his expression a mask of cool civility. He was a master of this. The predator playing philanthropist. I smiled until my face ached, a perfect porcelain doll on his arm. I was playing my part. And then I saw him. Across the ballroom, standing near the champagne fountain. Marcus. He was laughing, his head thrown back, one hand resting possessively on the arm of the woman beside him. Jessica. She was wearing a red dress that screamed for attention. My stomach twisted into a knot of ice and fire. I hadn't known they would be here. Of course they would be here. Marcus was a social climber, and this was the summit. My breath hitched. The carefully constructed composure I wore like armor began to crack. Kenji's fingers tightened on my back, a subtle, questioning pressure. I didn't look at him. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the scene that had shattered my life. As if he felt my stare, Marcus turned his head. His eyes scanned the room, a lazy, confident sweep of a man who believed he belonged. They passed over me, then snapped back. His smile vanished. The glass in his hand tilted, champagne sloshing over the rim. He froze, utterly, completely still. His face, a mask of disbelief, then confusion, then a dark, ugly flicker of something I recognized. Wounded pride. He saw me. He saw the dress, the diamonds, the transformation. Then his eyes moved from me to the man whose hand was on my back. He saw Kenji Tanaka, and the confusion on his face curdled into pure, unadulterated shock. He paled, his mouth falling slightly open. Jessica tugged on his arm, her voice a petulant murmur, but he didn't seem to hear her. He just stared, looking at me as if I were a ghost who had just materialized at the feast. Kenji leaned in, his voice a whisper of cold silk against my ear. An acquaintance. I finally tore my gaze away from my past and looked up at my present. At the man who owned this room, who owned my safety, who owned, for all intents and purposes, me. He's the man I used to be married to, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. A flicker of something, not surprise, just interest, passed through Kenji's dark eyes. His gaze slid across the room to Marcus, a predator casually assessing a lesser creature in his territory. A slow, chilling smile touched the corner of his mouth, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I see, he murmured. And in those two words, I heard the promise of a reckoning. The night was no longer about charity. It was about power, and I was standing at the center of it. Marcus, spurred by some fool's courage or perhaps Jessica's insistent whispering, began to move toward us. He navigated the crowd with a clumsy determination, his eyes locked on me. Jessica trailed behind him, her expression a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. Kenji didn't move. He simply watched him come, his hand still resting on my back, a silent anchor in the swirling social current. The air around us grew colder, the ambient chatter of the party seeming to recede. Imani? Marcus stopped a few feet away, his voice tight. He ignored Kenji completely, a fatal mistake. What are you doing here? How did you? He gestured vaguely at my dress, the necklace, the entire impossible picture I presented. Before I could answer, Kenji spoke. His voice was quiet, almost conversational, yet it cut through the air like a shard of glass. She is with me. Marcus finally looked at him, a flicker of bravado in his eyes that was quickly extinguished by what he saw there. Kenji's gaze was flat, devoid of emotion. It was the gaze of a man looking at an insect. I'm her husband, Marcus blurted out, then corrected himself with a flush of color. Ex-husband. I'm just surprised to see her here. Your surprise is not my concern, Kenji said, his tone unchanging. He then did something that sent a chill down my spine. He looked at me, a fleeting softness in his eyes that no one else would have seen. Are you enjoying the evening, my love? The endearment was for Marcus's benefit, a sharp, deliberate twist of the knife. It worked. Marcus flinched as if struck. I found my voice, playing my part. Very much, I said, meeting Kenji's gaze. Thank you. Jessica finally stepped forward, placing a perfectly manicured hand on Marcus's arm. Marcus, darling, let's get a drink. Don't bother your ex-wife. She gave me a dismissive, pitying look that quickly faltered as she took in the man beside me. Kenji's eyes slid to her, and for the first time, a hint of disdain entered his expression. He looked from her back to Marcus. You traded a jewel for a piece of glass, he said, not to them, but as a simple statement of fact. Then, he guided me away, turning his back on them, as if they had ceased to exist. He didn't need to say another word. The dismissal was absolute. The humiliation was complete. As we walked away, I risked a glance over my shoulder. Marcus was still standing there, frozen, his face a storm of rage and shame. Jessica was pulling at his sleeve, her face pinched with anger. In that moment, I felt a cold, sharp spike of satisfaction. It wasn't happiness. It was vengeance. And it tasted like ash. The rest of the night was a blur. We left early. The silent ride back to the penthouse was thick with unspoken tension. I sat as far from him as I could in the back of the Rolls-Royce, the city lights painting streaks across the tinted windows. I could feel his eyes on me. Back in the apartment, the silence was even louder. I walked to the window, looking down at the river of light that was Tokyo. He made you look small, Kenji said from behind me. I turned. He was unbuttoning his cuffs, his movements precise and economical. I was small. He left me with nothing. Nothing is a blank canvas. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms covered in the dense, traditional ink of his tattoos. A creature of myth and legend, bound in flesh and blood. It is a chance to create something new. Was that what I was? Something he was creating? The thought was unsettling. This arrangement. It's not real. Tonight was a performance. Everything is a performance, he countered, walking to the bar and pouring 2 glasses of whiskey. He held one out to me. The question is whether you are playing a role given to you, or one you have chosen. I took the glass, my fingers brushing his. A spark of heat, unexpected and sharp.
I chose survival.
Did you? He watched me over the rim of his glass, his eyes searching mine. Or did you choose power? I didn't have an answer. The weeks that followed settled into a strange rhythm. I lived a life of quiet luxury, surrounded by art and beauty, but it was a lonely existence. Kenji was often gone, disappearing for days at a time. When he was home, he was a silent, brooding presence. We coexisted in the vast, sterile space of the penthouse, 2 ghosts haunting the same house. But I watched him. I learned him. I saw the way his men deferred to him with a respect that bordered on religious fear. I learned to read the subtle shifts in his posture, the tightening of his jaw that preceded a storm. I saw the cold, surgical precision with which he ran his empire through encrypted calls and hushed meetings. One night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered into his study, a room I usually avoided. It was stark and masculine, smelling of old books and his smoky cologne. A single photograph sat on his desk in a simple silver frame. It was of a young woman, barely a girl, with Kenji's eyes and a bright, fearless smile. She was beautiful, and she was gone. I knew it with a certainty that chilled me to the bone. The door opened behind me. Kenji stood there, his suit jacket off, his expression harder than I'd ever seen it. His eyes went from me to the photograph in my hand. "Put it down," he said. His voice was dangerously low. My heart hammered against my ribs. I placed the frame carefully back on the desk.
I'm sorry.
I didn't mean to pry. He walked into the room, stopping in front of the desk, but not looking at the photo. He looked at me. For a moment, the mask slipped. I saw a flash of raw, bottomless grief in his eyes. It was so profound it almost brought me to my knees. It was the look of a man who had failed in the one duty that mattered to him. Her name was Akari, he said, his voice rough. My sister. He didn't say what happened to her. He didn't have to. The violence of his world had taken her.
That was his wound.
The failure he carried every single day. The reason he kept the world and everyone in it at a distance. He had failed to protect her. He would never allow himself that vulnerability again. He turned and left the study without another word, the mask of cold control firmly back in place. But it was too late. I had seen the man beneath the monster, and that was infinitely more dangerous. The first tremor of real danger came a week later. We were scheduled to have dinner at a private restaurant in Ginza. A last-minute call came for Kenji, a problem with a shipment at the docks. He was delayed. He told me to go ahead, that he would meet me there. His driver, a silent mountain of a man named Ito, drove me. We were 2 blocks from the restaurant when the world exploded. A blast of heat and sound threw me against the side of the car. The windows of our vehicle shattered. Car alarms shrieked through the sudden, ringing silence in my ears. Ahead of us, where the restaurant had been, there was now a column of black smoke and fire. Ito was shouting into his radio, his voice urgent. He threw the car into reverse, tires squealing. My hands were shaking, my breath coming in ragged gasps. That was meant for him.
For us.
We met Kenji and 2 other cars at a nondescript warehouse by the river. He got out of his car before it had even stopped moving. He strode to my door and wrenched it open. His eyes scanned me, frantic and wild in a way I had never seen. Are you hurt? He demanded, his hands hovering over me, not daring to touch. No, I whispered, my voice trembling.
I've fine.
He reached in, his hand cupping the back of my neck, his thumbs stroking my skin. The gesture was shockingly gentle. His eyes were blazing. Ito, get her out of here. Take her to the safe house, he turned to his other men. Find out who did this. I want a name.
I had a chance then.
A clear moment. In the chaos, I could have told Ito to take me to the embassy. I could have run, demanded to be let out of our contract, fled this life of violence that was no longer abstract. But as I looked at Kenji's face, at the cold fury etched there, I saw something else. It was the same haunted look from his study, the fear of losing someone else he was meant to protect. I made a choice. No, I said, my voice stronger now. I'm staying with you. His head snapped back to me, his eyes wide with surprise. His men stared. No one said no to him. It is not safe, he said, his voice clipped. Is it ever? I countered. They were targeting you. They think I'm your weakness. Don't let them be right. A long moment passed. He searched my face, looking for something.
Fear.
Deceit. He found only resolve. A slow nod. Get in my car. That was the moment everything changed. I wasn't just the contracted wife anymore. I had chosen my side. We drove to another of his properties, a traditional house hidden behind high walls and ancient pine trees. It was a fortress of tranquility. Inside, the air smelled of tatami mats and cedar. While his men spoke in hushed, urgent tones in another room, Kenji led me to a small sitting area overlooking a koi pond. He had a shallow cut on his cheek from flying debris, a thin line of blood he hadn't seemed to notice. You're bleeding, I said, my voice soft. He touched his face, his fingers coming away red. He looked at it with disinterest. I went to a nearby bathroom and found a first aid kit. When I returned, he was standing by the window, staring out at the garden. He didn't turn as I approached. You should have run, he said, his voice flat. Where would I go? I asked, dabbing a sterile wipe on his cheek. He flinched, not from the sting, but from the contact. His skin was warm. Anywhere. Away from this. This is my life now, I said, my focus on the cut. I signed a contract. The contract did not include car bombs. He finally looked at me. We were so close I could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. His gaze dropped to my mouth. The air crackled, thick with unspoken things. The silence between us was not empty. It was filled with the thunder of the explosion, with the ghost of a sister, with the terrifying, magnetic pull that was growing between us. He said my name, Imani, and it sounded like a prayer and a curse all at once. He lifted a hand, his fingers tracing the line of my jaw, his touch sending a jolt through my entire body. I told myself it was survival instinct, a response to the adrenaline. I was lying to myself. That night, I learned that the attack was from a rival clan, the Ryuchi family. They were making a play for Kenji's territory. They had miscalculated. They thought targeting me would make him cautious. Instead, it had awakened something cold and absolute within him. In the days that followed, I saw the true extent of his power. It was not in explosions or gunfire. It was in the quiet, systematic way he dismantled his enemies' operations. A word here, a data transfer there, a key figure disappearing in the night. It was surgical.
It was terrifying.
And I discovered something that should have made me run for the hills. I overheard a conversation not meant for my ears. He was speaking to his second-in-command about the man who had betrayed him years ago, the one whose actions led to his sister Akari's death. Kenji hadn't just had the man killed. He had destroyed his entire life first. His business, his family, his reputation. He had left him with nothing but his shame before he finally ended it. The cold, methodical cruelty of it made my blood run cold.
This was the man I was tied to.
The war with the Ryuchi clan escalated. They grew desperate, and desperation made them sloppy. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I had been given slightly more freedom, a concession to my refusal to be locked away. I was visiting a small art gallery in Omotesando, flanked by two of Kenji's guards. It was a brief illusion of normalcy. They came out of nowhere. A black van screeched to a halt. Men in masks swarmed out. My guards moved to intercept, and the street erupted in chaos. One of my guards went down. The other shoved me back toward the gallery. "Get inside," he yelled. A hand clamped over my mouth, an arm of steel wrapped around my waist, dragging me back toward the van. I bit down hard. The man grunted in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was enough. I stomped my heel down on his instep and drove my elbow back into his ribs. He staggered. But there were too many of them. Another pair of hands grabbed me. They were dragging me into the van when Kenji's car appeared at the end of the street, moving at an impossible speed. It didn't slow down. It slammed into the side of the van with a deafening crunch of metal. Kenji was out of the car before it stopped shuddering. He moved through the chaos like a phantom, a blur of dark motion and lethal intent. He dispatched the two men holding me with a brutal efficiency that was both horrifying and beautiful.
He didn't look at me.
His entire focus was on the threat. When it was over, when the remaining assailants were either dead or dying, he finally turned to me. He crossed the space between us in 2 strides and pulled me against him. It wasn't a gentle embrace. It was a desperate, crushing hold, his face buried in my hair. I could feel him trembling, not with fear, but with a rage so profound it seemed to shake the very ground we stood on. Back at the house, the silence was different. It wasn't empty. It was heavy with the aftermath of violence. He poured me a brandy, his hands for once not perfectly steady. I had crossed a line. In that alley, I hadn't just screamed or cried. I had fought back. I had hurt someone. A small, dark part of me had registered a grim satisfaction when the man holding me had cried out in pain. The woman who curated art exhibits was gone. In her place was someone who knew how to survive in the dark. Kenji stood in front of me, his face a grim mask, but his eyes were raw, stripped of all pretense. "When I saw their hands on you," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper, "I would have burned this city to the ground to get you back." It wasn't a declaration of love. It was a confession, a statement of fact.
A claim.
He was telling me that I was his and that the world would burn before he let anyone take me. I met his gaze, my heart pounding a wild, frantic rhythm against my ribs. "I know," I whispered. And it was the truest thing I had ever said. The Ryuchi clan had made their final mistake. They had made it personal. But their next move was one neither of us anticipated. They found a new pawn. A bitter, humiliated man with a bruised ego and a misguided sense of ownership. They went to Marcus. My phone rang 2 days later. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer. "Imani." The voice was like a ghost from another life. "Marcus. Listen to me," he said, his voice rushed and low. "I know you're in trouble. I saw that man. I know who he is. I can help you. I can get you out." It was a trap. I knew it instantly. Marcus didn't have the courage or the resources to stand up to a man like Kenji. He was being used.
How?
I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "Just meet me."
Please, Imani.
"For the sake of what we used to have." The old warehouse district by the bay. Pier 4. Tomorrow at noon.
Come alone.
If he knows, he'll stop you. This is your only chance. I hung up the phone, a cold, clear purpose settling over me. I was not the woman Marcus remembered. I was not a victim to be rescued. I found Kenji in his study. I told him everything. He listened, his face impassive, but I saw the muscles in his jaw bunch. When I was finished, he was silent for a long moment. "It is a trap," he said finally. "I know," I replied, "and I'm going to walk right into it." He started to object, but I cut him off. "They want to use me as bait. So let them. You know the location. You know the time. This is how you end it. But you do it my way." For the first time, I was not his asset or his responsibility. I was his partner.
He saw the steel in my eyes, the resolve.
He gave a single, sharp nod. The next day, I drove myself to the pier. I wore a simple black dress and a wire. The air was thick with the smell of salt and decay. Marcus was waiting for me at the end of the pier, looking nervous, constantly glancing over his shoulder. "You came," he said, relief washing over his face. I was so worried. "Save it, Marcus," I said, stopping a few feet from him. "What do you want?" "I want to help you. That man is a monster. I can take you to the police, to the embassy." "You mean the people who are waiting in that warehouse over there?" I tilted my head toward the building where I knew Ryuchi's men were watching. "The people who promised you what?"
"Money?"
"A chance to feel like a man again after Kenji made you look like a child at that party." The color drained from his face. I don't know what you're talking about." "You traded me for a business deal, Marcus. Now you're trying to trade me again to save your pathetic pride. You haven't changed at all." That was the moment I truly let him go. The anger, the hurt, it all dissolved into a cold, clear pity. From the shadows of the warehouse, men began to emerge. Ryuchi himself stepped out, a cruel smile on his face. "Clever girl," he said. "But it doesn't matter. You're still here." "Am I?" asked, my voice calm. On that cue, all hell broke loose. Kenji's men materialized from the surrounding buildings, moving with silent, deadly coordination. It was an ambush within an ambush. Ryuchi's men were caught completely by surprise. In the ensuing chaos, Marcus stood frozen in terror. Ryuchi, realizing he had been played, pulled a knife and lunged for me. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I stood my ground, my eyes locked on his. Because I knew Kenji would not let him reach me. He was there, a shadow moving faster than thought. He intercepted Ryuchi, the fight brutally short and decisive. When it was over, Ryuchi lay on the ground, and Kenji stood over him, not even breathing hard. His men were securing the area, dealing with Marcus, who had collapsed into a weeping mess. Kenji walked toward me, his eyes ignoring everyone else. He stopped in front of me, his gaze sweeping over me, checking for any harm. He gently touched a scratch on my arm where one of the men had grabbed me. "You were never a pawn," he said, his voice low and rough with emotion. "You were always a queen. It was everything. It was an acknowledgement, a promise, a treaty signed in the aftermath of battle." He saw me, not as the woman he had to protect, but as the woman who stood beside him. We paid a cost for that victory. My old life, my old self, was gone forever, a casualty of a war I had chosen to fight. Marcus was ruined, a broken man who would be swept away by the undertow of this world. And Kenji had let someone in. He had broken his own sacred rule and allowed himself a vulnerability. He had a weakness again, but this time his weakness was also his strength. That night, we stood at the window of the penthouse, the city glittering below us like a sea of captured stars. It was his kingdom, this sprawling, beautiful, dangerous place. He came to stand behind me, his heat a solid presence at my back.
He didn't speak.
He simply laid his hand over mine where it rested on the cold glass. It was not the gesture of a lover. It was the gesture of a king, a claim,
A pact.
The weight of his hand was the weight of this life, this power, this darkness. And I did not pull away. I leaned back just slightly, accepting it. Accepting him. This was my choice. This was my throne.